We're here for another take of Torah on Tap and the open forum with Rabbi Landis. So I'm going to actually, the first question was already asked, so we don't have to put anyone on the spot. Mikhail over there asked the question. You might have noticed, especially if you only see me once a month at Torah on Tap, you probably notice my face looks a little bit different than it usually does. I probably look a good 10, 15, 20 years older than usual, and that is this gray beard on my face. I often get the question, I was just telling Deborah that I often get the question, like, you're a rabbi, why don't you have a beard? And my answer to that is always because I want to stay married. Because my wife hates my beard, and even when before it was gray, she didn't like my beard, and now that it is gray, all the more so. But the question is, what's with the beard? And if you notice the slight change of menu, although we have had sushi before, the past few times we always had we had the Israeli cuisine with the shawarma and everything. But the bottom line is, we were in a time period known as the 9 days, and it's one of the 2 time periods on the Jewish calendar where we are essentially in national mourning. Now the question is, why? And like Mikhail even asked me, like where'd this come from? I never heard of this growing up. And there's a very simple reason why you probably never heard of it growing up, and that is because it happens in the summer. And therefore, if you went to Jewish camp, and that year, whichever whether you went to first session or second session, Tisha B'av collided with your camp, then you knew about Tisha B'av. If it didn't, you didn't. And that was the bottom line, because you weren't in Hebrew school, you probably weren't going to synagogue. So it had to be from summer camp, might have been one of the only ways you would have ever heard of Tisha B'av. I know for me as a kid, my first exposure to Tisha B'av came from summer camp pretty much. And that's how I think our early memories of Tisha B'av are how did the summer camps observe Tisha B'av. So to understand, first of all, and answer Mikhail's question about what's with the 9 days, what's with the 3 weeks, we first have to start with Tisha B'av, which is the last day of it all, and then we'll work backwards to understand what the whole time period is. First of all, by a show of hands, who here, and don't worry, the camera's just on me, not on you, who's never heard of Tisha B'av? Cool, awesome. Did you go to camp?
I did Gucci 1 year, but that was like...
First session or second session? I have to look at the calendar, whatever. I think Gucci is the worst name for a camp in the world, by the way. I was in Cincinnati for 8 years, so a lot of kids went to Gucci, and it's like, it sounds like you're going to a designer purse camp, you know? It's, yeah, that was a very funny name for a camp. Anyhow, but you're not alone, because I think a lot of people don't know what Tisha B'av is, or haven't even heard of Tisha B'av. It reminds me of a story that I had when I went to public school. And after I started becoming religious, I would, at the beginning of each semester, I'd prepare like a memo for all my teachers with all the Jewish holidays that I was going to be missing for. And it came springtime, and on the memo, it's I'm going to miss for Passover, and I'm going to miss for Shavuos. And one of my teachers was like, Shavuos is a real thing? Like, that really exists? I said, come on, you don't have to miss school for Shavuos. That's not real. Because, now, where was he coming from? Because if you look at some old movies, who created Hollywood? It was all Jews, right? All Jews. And not only that, but they were all either immigrants themselves or first-generation Americans. So they all came from somewhat traditional backgrounds, but they were all trying to kind of run away from that. That was they were really trying to be secular and not be so Jewish, but they regularly dropped in Jewish themes throughout their movies. And a lot of those old movies from the 20s, 30s, 40s, I think the first talking movie was the 20s, I think it was, the 30s, whatever. And a lot of these old movies, they'd make this joke about, oh, we'll take care of it next Shavuos. As a way of saying, like, okay, eventually we'll get to it. And Shavuos is one holiday that a lot of people aren't familiar with, because again, it usually coincides with the beginning of the summer, and therefore if you're going to Hebrew school and all this, you miss Shavuos. So it's not Shavuos, we're not talking about Shavuos now, but Tisha B'av is in the same category. A lot of people miss it because it comes in the summer. So what is Tisha B'av? So Tisha B'av is the day of national Jewish mourning. Not mourning like morning time, but mourning like M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. Now, if you know anything about Jewish history, you know that that we have plenty of things essentially to cry over, right? In fact, we do a program today in Jewish history, and I got a negative review, a 2-star review on Amazon. It's an Amazon Alexa. It's a bunch of things, but you get on Amazon. It's an Amazon Alexa skill, and someone put a 2-star review saying it's too negative. Right, because what I do is I give little lessons for every day on the Jewish calendar and what happened on this day in Jewish history. Right, that's what we do. So if you're looking like that, a lot of days in Jewish history were pretty negative, because let's face it, what's the old line that they say about every Jewish holiday? They try to kill us, we won, let's eat. Right, and that really sums up Jewish history, because if you think about it, there have especially if you look at the calendar, any single day on the calendar you can pick, well, this tragedy happened and that tragedy happened, and that kind of is our history. By the way, my response to her negative review is that it's not negative, because there's a question asked by a great rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, as what's the greatest miracle that ever happened in world history? He was an 18th century German rabbi, and he writes the greatest miracle is the fact that we are still here practicing Judaism after everything we've been through. Right? And he wrote that in the 18th century, so now in the 21st century, all the more so. And the fact that we've gone through so many trials and tribulations and tragedies, and yet we're still here at BottleHouse on a Thursday night eating sushi and talking Torah, that shows that there's something very special about the Jewish people. But there's a lot of tragedies on our calendar, right? So our calendar has one day where we mourn. One day, that's it. So with all these tragedies, we're really only supposed to mourn, at least in an intense way, for one day for all these tragedies. And that's what Tisha B'av is. And Tisha B'av itself is a fast day. It's kind of similar to Yom Kippur, but Yom Kippur is, I once heard a great comparison between Yom Kippur and Tisha B'av. The Yom Kippur is like a day in heaven, and Tisha B'av is like a day in hell. That's an interesting way to compare the two. Maybe we'll get into that a bit. But it's a day where we don't fast. Where we fast. We don't eat, drink. We don't wear leather shoes. This is similar. You're not supposed to wash. So it's similar to Yom Kippur in that regard. But the idea is that we're supposed to be focused on the tragedies. Now, why was this day chosen? Because as I said before, you can pick almost any day on the Jewish calendar and find a tragedy. So why was this day chosen as the day of National Jewish Mourning? And the answer is, the original answer is something that happened way back in the desert. Now, I don't mean like the Palm Springs desert. I'm talking about the desert, the desert between Egypt and Israel, when the Jews were traveling from Egypt to Israel. So the whole first year of the Exodus was really, everyone's been to Israel at least once? Anyone been to Egypt? Anyone been to Egypt? I've never been to Egypt. But anyone Egypt? Mikhail? Have you walked from Egypt to Israel? No?
Yes, because I crossed from Gilad into the top of Gilad.
Okay. Back on foot. Okay, so got it. But he did it, so he crossed. But but still, it's pretty close. And even if you have to go through the Sinai Desert, it's still pretty close, right? So if you were walking from Israel from Egypt to Israel, how long do you think it'd take you? I don't know, maybe a few weeks, maybe a month, but it wouldn't take you 40 years. So why did it take us 40 years? Now I know we're dealing with Jews, and they like to complain, and it's hot and sandy and all that, but that's not the answer. The answer is that the first 7 weeks was the process of getting the Torah of Mount Sinai. 7 weeks after they leave Egypt, they get the Torah of Mount Sinai. So the next, the beginning, so Mount Sinai is 7 weeks later, right? Then the next 40 days, that's when Moses is on the mountain getting the tablets. Now Moses comes back with the tablets, and what happens? Golden calf. Not so good, right? Not so good for the Jews. The cleanup process for the golden calf took about a year. Yeah, but we don't have to get into it too much because then I have to do a Tisha B'av and I have to answer Mikhail's question. But the cleanup process for the golden calf takes about a year. After they clean it up, they're ready to go. They're ready to move into the land of Israel. So we're 1 year after the Exodus. So what do? They send spies to check out the land to see, hey, can we, what's this going to be like? They send 12 spies, and those 12 spies come back, at least 10 of them come back with a very negative report. Very negative report. And they say, the land has these giants, and not only that, but it has these huge fruit, and they actually come with these huge clusters of grapes, the Torah tells us. And anyone ever seen in Israel the emblem for the Ministry of Tourism? What is it? It's two men carrying big clusters of grapes. That's the spies. That's what it's referencing. Now, whatever marketing department came up with that, it wasn't Jazz's department, whatever marketing department came up with that had no clue what they were doing, because basically that was the first two tourists that ever came to Israel, and they came back with a bad report. I don't know why that would be your emblem for the Ministry of Tourism. Be it as it may, that's what it is. But 10 out of 12 of the spies come back with a bad report. They tell the Jewish people, we can't do this. There's no way we can make it in the land of Israel. We got to go back to Egypt. And how do the Jewish people respond? Do you think they listen to the 10 negative reports or the 2 positive reports? Negative, right. They go for the 10 negative reports, and they cry. And they start crying this meaningless cry. Right, that's what the Talmud tells us, a meaningless cry, because they're crying for nothing. The Almighty looks down and says, because you cried this meaningless cry on this night, I'm establishing this night as a night of crying for all generations. And that was Tisha B'av. So that was the beginning of Tisha B'av. Now Chelsea has a confused look on her face.
Is that like ironic? Is that...
Right, so Chelsea's got a look. So ask the question, Chelsea. Let me see if you're going where I'm going with the question. Or I can ask the question for you. So.
Okay, I don't even know.
So I'll say what bothers me about this. So here you have the Almighty, our Father who art in heaven, and we mess up by crying, meaningless cry, and the punishment is that on this night for all generations we'll really have a reason to cry, right? God says, you're crying for nothing, I'm going to give you a reason to cry. Now, I'm a parent, I have 5 beautiful children, and I'm an expert in cute kids because of that, and let's say one of my kids comes to me, like my 4-year-old, who, as she often does, she's cute as could be, but you know, she comes sometimes and cries a meaningless cry. In fact, dare I say, most of the time she comes crying, it's meaningless, right? It's like, what's she crying about? And how would I deal with that as a parent? So I could say, oh, Zahavi, you're crying for no reason. I'm going to give you a reason to cry. You'd lock me up. You'd call child services on me, right? But it's like our dysfunctional Father who art in heaven. This is how he deals with the Jewish people. We cry this meaningless cry on the 9th day of the month of Av. He says, I'm going to make this a night to cry for all generations. This is going to be Tisha B'av. What's going on over there? It makes no sense. And not only that, but that's I just told you what the Talmud says, but the history has backed it up. Because if we look at this date on the Jewish calendar, there have been countless tragedies. A lot of the big ones have happened specifically on the 9th day of the month of Av. For example, 422 before the Common Era, first temple destroyed. 70 after the Common Era, second temple destroyed. After the second temple was destroyed, there's a community in a city called Beitar, which sort of rejuvenates and rebuilds and actually gets into another skirmish with the Romans. Beitar destroyed, 1 million Jews killed in that war. When did that happen? Tisha B'av, 9th day of the month of Av. Fast forward, Jews are kicked out of Spain, expelled from Spain. What was the year? We all know it, 1492. Actually, you know it because it's 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But the same exact year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Jews were kicked out of Spain. What day were they kicked out of Spain? Tisha B'av. What day did Columbus leave Spain? The 10th day of Av. How do we know that? Because Columbus writes in his log that he tried to leave the port of Chaldees in Spain on the day before, but it was so clogged with ships taking the Jews out of the country because they'd just been expelled that he had to delay a day and leave on the 10th of Av. And by the way, there were definitely Jews with him who were being expelled. And he was also a descendant of converso Jews, of Jews who had converted to avoid persecution. Okay? World War I, what day does it break out on? Tisha B'av, right? Okay, are we now? You could be a skeptic and say, "Come on, Rabbi, it's just an irony." I just gave you major tragedies: Spanish expulsion, First Temple, Second Temple, Beitar, and World War I. Anyone here like history besides me, or am I just wasting my time speaking about history? Well, I like history, so I'll tell you something. I'll spin my own wheels for a minute. If you study World War I and World War II, while we call it 2 different wars, it was one big war. Okay, I'm telling you that now. It was one big war with a reprieve in the middle for 20 years. That's really what it was. But it was World War II was really just built on the mistakes, or the unresolved mistakes of World War I, and it's one continuous war. Not to mention, if you look at World War I in a vacuum, obviously it's overshadowed with what happened in World War II. But the way one of my favorite historians once said it is that World War I was the destruction of European Jewry, and World War II was the annihilation of European Jewry. Because already after World War I, the community was destroyed. It was just uprooted, destroyed, and in the 20 years between the wars, they did not recover. And World War I breaks out on Tisha B'av. And I can go on and on. There's list upon list upon list of things that happened specifically on that date. So you say that, okay, you know, the Almighty kind of like, don't mess with the Almighty, right? He says he's going to give us a reason to cry. He's given us a reason to cry. So you might say, like, okay, but still, like our dysfunctional Father who art in heaven, how is that a response to this meaningless cry, quote unquote? So the answer is, it's not a punishment, it's a reality. It's a reality. Because why did the Jewish people cry at that point when they heard this negative report? Let me ask you a question. We have maybe in the room, we got some entrepreneurs, we got some people in early parts of their career. People have dreams and aspirations, goals that they're working on. How many people have ever had a situation with someone you respect, someone authoritative, saying, you know, your idea is stupid, and in a nice way, not necessarily in a pejorative way, but you know, that idea is crazy. What you're doing is stupid. Your life commitment is ridiculous. How many ever had a situation like that? Right? Many of us have had. I've had many. But you know what? If I believe in what I'm doing, what does that do to me? Does it deter me? No. If anything, a lot of us, it gives us more resolve to stick with what we're doing. So if the Jewish people hear these negative reports, but they hear Joshua stand up and say, don't listen to them, and Caleb to stand up and say, don't listen to them, and Moses stand up and say, don't listen to them, and these are the same Jews that stood on Mount Sinai, and these are the same Jews that saw the 10 plagues in Egypt and went through the splitting of the sea. What would you do? So there's a reflection on what was on the inside. There's a reflection of essentially saying that, we're not ready for this. We're not ready for this. We're just not ready for greatness. We're not ready for the greatness that we could have going into the land of Israel, living a very spiritual existence, which what it would have been. That's what happened. So the reality was, you're not ready for this. And until you're ready to live this lofty life that I have set out for the Jewish people, says the Almighty, it's going to be a rough time in exile. It's just going to be rough. But once you're ready to do it right and to be focused on what a Jew is supposed to be, then we'll get somewhere. So that's essentially what happened then. And the truth is, the answer and the explanation is actually right there in the verses of the spies. The spies, when they came back in their report, they said the words, they said that there's giants in Israel, and they said, V'nehi be'einehim kechagavim. We appeared in their eyes like grasshoppers. What does that mean, we appeared in their eyes? Like, how do you know how you appeared in their eyes? What are they saying? They're saying, we felt small, we felt insignificant. So many of the teachers of Jewish ethics say that's what the Jewish people has. That's one of the missions of the Jewish people, is to correct in our DNA that nehi ve'anehim kechagavim, that feeling like we're grasshoppers. We have to realize we are not grasshoppers. We are great. We're tremendous. And once we realize that, there'll be no more Tisha B'av. But until then, there's still Tisha B'av. So anyways, I gave you several historical examples that actually happen on Tisha B'av. But Tisha B'av becomes the day of mourning for all tragedies. Because what do we say? We say that we are a people in exile. Right? This is hard for us to understand a lot of times, but Judaism is not a religion. Right? I mean, it really is a religion, but it's a national religion of the Jewish people is what it is. We are a nationality. We're a nationality in exile. I probably told the story a million times. I told it once, and I'm sure I've said it in Torah on tap. But the Dalai Lama once had a meeting of a bunch of leaders of the major Jewish movements. He had, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. He had from the federations, all the leaders from the major movements. Because he said he had a problem. He said his people have been in exile, and they're starting to lose it a little bit, lose their culture, lose their connection to being Tibetan people. And he sees that the Jews have been in exile for 2,000 years. He said to the Jews, we've been in exile for 30 years and we can't do it. How have you guys done this for 2,000 years? Be it as it may, we are a nation in exile. And the ideal state of the Jewish people is that we have our national homeland, we live in our national homeland. Judaism is our religion. It's one part of who we are. And it's such what a lot of the Jewish books write about is how lofty and how tremendous that time period will be. Anyhow, we look at any of the tragedies that we've gone through for the 2,000 years since the destruction of the Second Temple as an outgrowth of being in exile. Because let's take the Holocaust for example, and there's probably dates in the Holocaust we can tie it back to Tisha B'av. The deportation of the Warsaw Ghetto began on Tisha B'av, for example. But I'm not going to tell you like Hitler became chancellor on Tisha B'av. That didn't happen. That was actually May 31st, which was the day after my birthday, a few years before. But be it as it may, we look at the Holocaust and we mourn that on Tisha B'av. We look at the pogroms of the Cossacks and the Khmelnytsky massacres and all these tragedies and the Russian pogroms that took place in the 19th century and the Crusades and the bloodshed at the time of the Crusades, and we talk about all of that on Tisha B'av. And the custom is you say different lamentations connecting to all of these historical time periods on Tisha B'av. Why? They didn't all happen on Tisha B'av. The answer is the root of them all happening is on Tisha B'av. Because let's face it, if we weren't a people in exile, and we were living in Israel, and living in a unified way in the land of Israel, and in a protected way, in a divinely protected way in the land of Israel, there would have never been Crusades, there would have never been Cossacks, there would have never been Nazis. These things wouldn't have happened. So the reason there were Cossacks, Crusaders and Nazis, etc., is because we're in exile. So when it comes to Tisha B'av, that's what we mourn. We mourn the whole spectrum of Jewish tragedy, of Jewish history, and everything that's happened to the Jewish people. So Tisha B'av, which will be Sunday, in truth, Tisha B'av on the calendar is on Saturday, but when Tisha B'av falls on Shabbos, it's pushed off to the next day, so we observe it on Sunday. And the custom is, like I said, we don't eat, we don't drink, we're going to sit on the floor, read the book of Lamentations, read these Lamentations written from the time of the destruction of the First Temple up until the Holocaust, covering all the historical tragedies that have happened, and that's Tisha B'av. But Tisha B'av started, or the time period started 3 weeks before. And what happened 3 weeks before Tisha B'av? That's the golden calf. The golden calf happens on the 17th of the month of Tammuz, And our sages tell us that the punishment that generation got to say that you guys aren't ready. This is being established a night of crying for all generation. You guys just aren't ready. That was not only from the spies, but it was the spies on top of the golden calf. Because the golden calf happened a year ago. As I mentioned, we had the cleanup process for a year. Now you have the spies, but the Almighty says they're just not ready. There's still golden calf Jews over here. So the 17th of Tammuz memorializes when the golden calf happened, when Moses smashes the tablets. And also, again, one of those interesting coincidences of history, as one of my teachers always say, a coincidence is just a miracle where God decides to remain anonymous. So the 17th of Tammuz is also the day when the Romans breached the wall to break into Jerusalem to destroy the Second Temple. So we have that also, and a few other tragedies thrown in as well on the 17th. But the 17th of Tammuz is a minor fast day, meaning sunrise to sunset, and Tisha B'av is a major fast day, meaning 25 hours, along with no bathing and a few other, and no wearing leather shoes, all that stuff. And the 3 weeks in between become a mourning period as well. So the custom is for the 3 weeks from the 17th of Tammuz until Tisha B'av, the custom is you don't take haircuts, you don't shave, hence the beard. We don't have weddings, we don't listen to music. But the Talmud says that meaningless of mematim b'simcha, that once the month of starts, we reduce the happiness even more, and that's the 9 days we're in now. We're actually up to the 8th of the 9 days, the 7th of the 9 days, because today's Thursday is the 7th, tomorrow's Friday is the 8th, Tisha B'av is technically on Shabbos, and then we're going to observe it on the 10th. So when the 9 days have, we add in a few more levels of mourning, and that the custom is we don't eat meat, we don't drink wine, and we don't swim. You're not supposed to do anything that could potentially be dangerous, because it's been looked at as a dangerous time for the Jewish people. You don't buy or wear anything new, and we don't bathe for pleasure purposes, meaning like when I took a bath or shower or whatever last night, it was a nice cold shower, because it shouldn't be enjoyable. Not ice cold. Chelsea looking at me like, this guy is crazy, isn't it? It was not one. You know when you have a nice warm shower, you want to stay in for like 20 minutes. That's the idea is you just put it warm enough to clean yourself and get out. That's and no swimming or hot tubs or enjoyable water excursion. So that's long story short. Mikhail started me the question. I gave you a nice half-an-hour answer, but I wanted to know what's with these 9 days, what's with the 3 weeks. That's what it is, and it is it's a very auspicious time on the calendar, because I think it's important that we do focus on the tragedies of Jewish history and learn the lessons that we're supposed to learn. That being said, they didn't make Tisha B'av 365 days, and they could have, because there's a tragedy on every day of the calendar, as I said before. It's quantified. The mourning is important, but baseline's happiness, right? That's why when the section of the Talmud I quoted before said meaningless of mematim b'simcha, that when Av comes in, we lessen our happiness. First of all, we don't take it away completely, but that tells us that baseline is happiness. Right? Baseline for a Jew has to be happiness. When do we focus on tragedies? This 3 weeks. That's it. Don't focus on it more than that. And we see the same thing when, God forbid, we lose a loved one. What do we do when we lose a loved one? It's a funny Jewish custom we have. What happens when you lose a parent, God forbid, a child, God forbid, a spouse, a sibling? What do? Say it's Shiva. What's Shiva? Shiva is a Hebrew word for 7. Why do they call our mourning period 7? We're funny people. I mean, it's numbers less. The answer is because it's 7 days, right? That's really where it comes from. Because the custom is that, really the halacha, the law is that when a person loses one of their 7 close relatives, you're supposed to mourn them for 7 days, and that's it. Now, the 7 days is the intense mourning. Then there's the idea of shloshim, the 30 days, a little less intense. And for a parent, there's a mourning practices for the whole year. But it's quantified. You don't just go on mourning forever, right? That's not how we do it, because baseline is happiness for us. But that being said, from time to time, we do need to mourn, and we do need to look at situations and take what it is to learn. So long story short, or short story long, or whatever this was, that's Tisha B'av, which will be the Sunday. That's the 9 days, which is going on right now. That's why Landis has this funny beard on his face. That's why we're having sushi instead of shawarma, and drinking a cold brew instead of. By the way, I said one of the customs is the customs is that we don't eat meat or drink wine. You're going to say, oh, I got a glass of wine. Don't worry, this is a meadery. It's mead. Mead is not really wine. Mead is honey wine. So by Jewish standards, it's not grape wine. It doesn't count. So Blair got all nervous. She texted me and said, can you drink beer on the 9 days? Because we have Torah on tap. I said, you can drink beer. We can even have the mead too, because it's not really from, you couldn't make Kiddush on it. You couldn't drink the 4 cups of Passover on mead, because it's honey wine. It's not grape wine. So, okay, Mikhail, you got another question. Can I see if anyone else has one, or before we get...
Well, let's follow up what you said. So the Shabbat. So because we're pushed the ninth day to Sunday because of where it falls in the week. So during the Shabbat, we're cool to be happy eating meat and whatever else. So it's like the whole thing is on pause for that one.
Yeah. So Mikhail's asking a good question that I'll repeat first of all for the camera, and then also for anyone over here who might not have heard him. Mikhail said, okay, so we have Shabbos that is on Tisha B'av. So that means like you just forget about Tisha B'av. I'll make your question a little bit better. Last Shabbos was the second day of the 9 days. So in any way the calendar falls, you're going to have a Shabbos in the middle of the 9 days. So does 9-day observance go on Shabbos? The answer is no. The answer is no. On Shabbos, we will eat meat, we'll drink wine. You can take a nice hot bath, get ready for Shabbos. Put on your nice clean Shabbos, Shabbos best. And because it's actually Shabbos, there's no mourning on even. And by the way, a person saying Shiva does not quite the same thing, but similar because there's no mourning on Shabbos. That's an ironclad Jewish law. So even when Tisha B'av falls on Shabbos, we push off to the next day. There's no mourning on Shabbos. Push it completely up to the next day. I'll tell you a funny story. Most of you guys are not only not old enough to remember, but many of you weren't born, except for Mikhail, because he's about my age. But he looks a lot younger than me. He doesn't have the gray beard, but I think he's actually older than me, but he looks younger. He looks great for his age. I'm sorry I'm giving you a hard time. Mikhail's going to kill me. He's like, ah.
I'm not going to kill you. I'm just going to grow a beard.
There you go. So for those of you who were old enough to, well, you're probably not old enough, but born during the first Persian Gulf War, anyone alive during it here? 19, right, okay, we got I wasn't going to out you, I'm putting on Mikhail because I know him. Right, we got a few people who remember it. So the first Persian Gulf War was in 1991, and it was the great struggle between Saddam Hussein and George H.W. Bush. And then a few years later, we had the sequel with Saddam Hussein and George W. Bush, right? That was a few years later. You probably remember that one. But the original was George H.W. Bush and Saddam Hussein in 1991. And George H.W. Bush got this whole big coalition together. All the nations of the world got together, and they told Saddam Hussein that he had to get out of Kuwait. Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait and tried to take it over, and they tried to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And the drop-dead date for him to get out of Kuwait was March 15th. Okay? So as March 15th was getting closer, people were getting very nervous because Saddam Hussein made it very clear that if he gets attacked by the coalition, what's he going to do? He's going to throw Scud missiles at the closest coalition member. And who is the closest coalition member to Iraq? Israel, right? So it's basically America's going to attack us and we're going to throw Scud missiles at Israel. That's what was going on. So people in Israel, needless to say, were getting very, very nervous. So there's a great rabbi alive at the time. He was actually in the last 2 or 3 years of his life, named Rosh Zalman Auerbach. And many people went to ask Rosh Zalman, like, what's going to be? What's going to be on March 15th? And he said, don't worry. On March 15th, the Jewish people are going to say Hallel. There's a special prayers of praise. And on Tisha B'av this year, we're going to eat meat and drink wine. So all of a sudden spreading throughout Jerusalem like wildfire. Oh, the rabbi said, Rosh Zalman Auerbach said that we're going to say Hallel on the 15th of March, and on Tisha B'av we're going to eat meat and drink wine. Until someone was smart enough to, this was before smartphones, but until someone was smart enough to look at a calendar and realize that March 15th was Rosh Chodesh, which is, we say Hallel anyways on Rosh Chodesh, and Tisha B'av that year fell on Shabbos. So they ate meat and drink wine like we will this year. So yeah, Tisha B'av, it's a normal Shabbos. We push it off. Push it off completely to the next day, and you eat meat, drink wine, but once sunset starts, that becomes Tisha B'av, and that's when we mourn. Another follow-up question from Mikhail.
So I was at Cantina this week, and yeah, I ate meat, and I got a question. Do you observe 9 days? I'm like, what?
Right.
What is this, optional? So
that's interesting. So I'm gonna reframe your question a little bit. You're saying Cantina is a kosher restaurant. How do they even serve me meat on the 9 days? Is that your question? Okay. So the answer is like this. First of all, in general, in kosher supervision, with sort of national policy in America with the different kosher supervising agencies, is restaurants are still allowed to serve meat during the 9 days. Because first of all, they could have non-Jewish clientele. It's possible. Second of all, the Sephardic custom's different. Anyone here Sephardi? Anyone here? Anyone?
Half Sephardi.
Which half? Top or bottom? So, as we talked about, I think last time or 2 times ago, to be technically Sephardi, your father would have to be Sephardi. So the Sephardic custom is to eat meat and drink wine during the 9 days. They don't abstain from eating meat and drinking wine during the 9 days. So they only wait until the week that Tisha B'av falls. It's a whole question with this year. When Tisha B'av falls on Sunday, they have no week that Tisha B'av falls. But the question is, this year's a really fallen Sunday because it really fell on Shabbos. So I don't remember what they do on years like this. But so there's that. There's non-Jews who go in general. Same thing with the fast day. Kosher restaurants are allowed to be open on a fast day. Because there might be, first of all, you might be picking up for later. You might be, so that far they don't have to push. So should they have told you? Maybe, I don't know, but now you know. But the custom is no meat during the 9 days, except for Shabbos. Okay, any other questions either relating to Tisha B'av, not relating to, yeah?
So following the interpretation that Tisha B'av happened because of the meaningless cry, and that everything is like a reenactment of that, does that mean that in following the interpretation that every time something tragic happens, it's because Jewish people are not ready for great news?
Essentially, that's essentially what I'm saying. In other words, but I think it's a little bit more of a structure than that. In other words, I'm sorry, I have to repeat the question for Rachel and for the camera. The question was, so according to what I'm saying, that the meaningless cry, so to speak, that the chain reaction was Tisha B'av, does that mean when God forbid, a bomb goes off on a bus in Israel and 20 people are killed, or a synagogue gets shot up in Pittsburgh, or anything in between. Again, there's tragedies that happen not to the Jewish people, like what happened this week in Dayton and in Texas, and there's also tragedies. So is what I'm saying, that if we were ready to excel as a people, so to speak, that these things wouldn't happen. So what I'm saying is, if we were ready to really be on a certain level, we would all live in Israel. And it would be a very different Israel than we have today. We think of, all living in Israel. Okay, so that means I gotta, fight traffic in Jerusalem, or I have to, or fight traffic in Tel Aviv, and pay ridiculous amounts for an apartment, and ride Egged, and whatever it is. It's not Israel as the state of Israel. We're talking a very lofty spiritual idea. If this was a Kabbalistic class, we would get a little bit into what it's talking about. But be it as it may, it's a whole different reality than we have, and it's a synthesis of the spiritual and the physical into one. Right, that's what it is. When we're talking about the Messianic era, essentially. Now, just to go back on that a little bit, Messianic era is something also that people it's thrown around a lot. But what does that mean? The English word Messiah is just English for the Hebrew word Mashiach, which means anointed one. What's mean anointed one? When a king was installed as king of Israel, the way that they would install him was to anoint him with oil. So the king was called the Mashiach, the anointed one. So all Mashiach or Messiah means is a reinstitution of the Davidic monarchy, a reinstitution of having a king in Israel, the kingship that we read about in the prophets. But it also comes together with, and a lot of the commentators talk about, especially the Kabbalistic ones, if you've ever heard, again, for Jewish summer camp, you might have heard that song, Lo Yisrael Goyel Goy Chever, right? What does that mean in English? Anyone ever look at the translation? Right? A nation will not raise a sword against any other nation. We will not know war anymore. What's that talking about? It's from the prophet Isaiah, and it's talking about the Messianic era. That when the Messiah comes, there will be no more war. That's a reality of the situation. Now, is that metaphysical? Is it physical? We can have that discussion. But bottom line is, there won't be war anymore. By the way, if you ever get hit up by a Christian missionary, I think that's one of the best responses as to why Jews don't believe in the Christian Messiah, is because, well, as Isaiah says straight out, that when Messiah comes, there ain't no more war. And not only has there been a ton of wars since Jesus was here, but there's been a lot of wars in the name of Jesus, and that's just something's wrong over there. So anyways, if you can see my video on Rabbi Landis' interaction with Christian missionaries, if you're interested in more on that. But be it as it may, there's many great, first of all, statements of our prophets, and when we get into Kabbalistic writings about what that era will look like, but something much greater than we can even imagine. So the net result of that will be, no more war, no more tragedy, no more any of this. But we have to be ready for that situation. We're not going to necessarily be granted that on a silver platter.
I'm sure you had to phrase the first question.
What's that? Didn't throw it at me. I'll rephrase it for you.
How do you reconcile blaming Jews for the tragedies that befall them?
That's a good question. In other words, I'll rephrase your question. Tell me if I got it right. Does that mean we're supposed to blame ourselves for the tragedy that has befallen us? Have befallen? Where's my grammarian? The tragedies that have befallen us. That's what you're asking, right? Or are you asking?
Suggest that it does. So I'm asking how does that suit?
So the answer is like this. It doesn't. Okay, I'm going to say two things. I'm going to say, first of all, when tragedy happens, at least I'm one talking, and I'm just telling you what Jewish tradition says, so take it or leave it, and I'm not going to push any belief on anybody, but Jewish tradition says that when a tragedy happens, there's got to be a reason. We don't believe in meaningless tragedy. We just don't. And that's why let's go early. Let's go to like some of these early tragedies. We're talking about the destruction of the first temple, destruction of the second temple. Our sages go into it and say, why did it happen? Not why it happened physically. I can tell you physically how it happened. This thing happened, that thing happened. We can look at the physical events and explain it. But why spiritually did it happen? What's that question? Why spiritually? Why did God at this time remove divine protection from the Jewish people? Right? That's really the question. And there's got to be a reason. Because otherwise we'd be protected, right? In other words, if we believe that God protects us, then we got to have a reason for it. So that's why when tragedies happen, there is introspection is very important. By the way, this is on a personal level and on a macro and a micro level. That whenever we have difficult situations, I'm a firm believer of this, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds and start talking about anyone's individual trials and tribulations they've had in their lives. That being said, I believe that everything happens for a reason. So therefore, if we have something difficult happen, it's there for us to somehow become better. That's what I believe. And we have to try and figure out how we're supposed to become better from whatever the trial or tribulation is. And by the way, a lot of people get this, and a lot of non-Jews get this. I mean, it's people around. What's that?
Is that backed by
Jewish tradition? 100%. And I'll give you an example of people who get this. We'll take some examples from famous people, or maybe not so famous people. But I'll tell you a story about a girl who was born to a teenage mother, was sexually abused as a young child. She repeated the same cycle as she was born from, and herself became a pregnant teenager. The baby was a stillborn. She ends up in a mental institution. Okay, what do you think happens to that lady? What's that? She gets help? She doesn't say she gets help. I don't know if she gets help or not, but she becomes Oprah Winfrey, right? That was Oprah's upbringing. So you could look at that, and dare I say, many people would that their life would be over forever. If by the time you're 18, you had a horrible upbringing, you're sexually abused, you had a stillborn teenage pregnancy. Would anyone have faulted you if you just say I'm done? And many people are done at that point, but Oprah turned it all around, and she became Oprah, right? And she learned from it and realized that these things happen for a reason. And this is there for me to be better. I'll give you another example of a young boy who says when he grew up he had 4 fathers. Meaning his mother was going back and forth to so many men, there are 4 people he called daddy, never knew which one was his real father. He never knew his real father. His mother beat him senseless many a times, would literally wash his mouth out with soap when she felt, literally with soap, when she felt it was necessary, and physically abused by his mother numerous times, ran away from home at the age of 17, became a custodian to support himself, cleaning up buildings. Someone gave him a book by someone by the name of Jim Rohn. Anyone know who Jim Rohn is? Jim Rohn was like the original motivational speakers out there in the world. He read Jim Rohn's book, was fascinated by it, tracked down Jim Rohn, said, I want to work for you. I'd rather sweep floors for you than sweep floors for this guy. Developed a relationship with Jim Rohn. Eventually started speaking at Jim Rohn seminars, and today's name is Tony Robbins. So right, most people know who Tony Robbins is. Guy's worth a lot of money, has something like 50 million students in the world, and the original coach, self-help, whatever it is. World famous, a lot of money, right? Great guy. But again, he could have looked at this thing and said, I'm done. That's micro. But the idea is if something happens, and he always says that I wouldn't trade my upbringing for anything. Because growing up in adversity and overcoming that made me who I am. If I had grown up in this cushy life, who knows what I would have become. Anyone here know who Gary Vaynerchuk is? Named Gary V? So I actually was hanging out with Gary V last week. My son and I went on a trip to Chicago. Gary Vaynerchuk right now is we don't have to give the whole bio. He's an entrepreneur. He has a company called VaynerX. It's a marketing giant in the world. He's an early investor, an early angel investor in Facebook, Twitter, Uber, worth about $150 million. He's had many successes in business. He's a one of these big internet personalities, influencer, social media guys, and very fascinating guy. Nice Jewish boy from Belarus, by the way. And right? You see Mikhail's happy with that one. And being a kid who immigrated from Belarus when he was 3 years old, had a lot of trials and tribulations, right? He lived in a studio apartment with his whole family. They didn't have much to eat. But he always says that it's the adversity and growing up with that adversity that kind of made him who he was. And he says I wouldn't trade it for anything. So I think it's true. I don't want to get into anyone's personal. We can have coffee another time if you want to talk about any personal trials and tribulations and learning from them. But it works micro and it works macro. That if something happens, it's there for us to learn from and there for us to grow from. So you look at our history, and there's been so many tragedies. Really, we got to learn from all of them. So I say, yeah, there's got to be something there for us to learn from all of them. Not to say it's our fault, because I know I'm walking a thin line over here, because Hitler is at fault. Right? Don't get me wrong. Right? Khmelnytsky is at fault. Ferdinand and Isabella are at fault. Turkmen is at fault. And, so and so on. They're all at fault. Nebuchadnezzar and Titus too. And all at fault. But that doesn't mean there's not something for us to learn from it. And for us to look at that why did that happen? There's got to be a lesson. Otherwise the world's random. Otherwise we live in a random world. And therefore nothing matters. And there's nothing to learn from anything. Right? We can't learn from tragedy, can't learn from anything. Right? And that's what I think. I could be wrong. But I'm the one who has the microphone. Where's my microphone? There you go. Could be wrong. Yeah, Chelsea.
So then what do we make of, let's say, the suffering, those who kind of paid like the ultimate price?
Those who?
Paid the ultimate price.
Pay the ultimate price. Yeah, so that's a good question. So Chelsea's asking, okay, but what about those who died? Last time I checked, there's very little that can be learned from death. Right? I'm saying you have to learn something, right? But if you're not here anymore, you can't really learn anything.
What is the make of their life? Are they...
Right. That's a good question. So we're getting into a little bit of a different question here, because essentially, I'm going to rephrase your question, but you'll tell me if I'm right. You're obviously not talking about someone who dies in a hospital bed at 103 of old age. You're talking about, God forbid, the kid who was blown up in Israel yesterday. The 18-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid, how old was he?
19-year-old stabbed to death.
19-year-old stabbed. I was stabbed. Okay, sorry, I didn't get the details yet. I just saw that, Rahman al-Islam, there's another situation. How do you understand that? That's what you're asking me, right? How do we make sense out of that? 19-year-old Jewish kid, nice religious Jewish boy, stabbed by an Arab terrorist to death. That's what you're asking? No?
Was it, are they the sacrifice that we're supposed to learn from?
Yeah. Like, was that their, not purpose, but like...
Yeah, so death gets complicated. I'll admit, talking about death is complicated. So, again, I'm going to tell you what I believe, and which is just traditional Jewish belief. I'm not trying to push. These are hard pills to swallow, and I get it. And by the way, when we talk about Kabbalistic idea, anyone ever heard the concept that you're not supposed to study Kabbalah until you're 40? You know why that is? Because the idea is by the time you're 40, you've hopefully studied enough and have enough of a foundation that you can really delve into these lofty ideas and they make sense. So I'm nowhere there, and I'm 41, right? And so therefore, I know I'm talking about very lofty ideas. I don't expect them to be swallowed like a pill, But when we talk about death, Jewish tradition teaches us that when someone dies, and there's an old line we say, it was their time. That's an old Jewish belief, a classical Jewish belief. In other words, it's not that they just died so they could give us a lesson, that for whatever reason, this person was only supposed to live on this planet for 19 years. You might say, how could that be? That's terrible. Right? It's terrible. Everyone should have a richas yamim, have long years, as we say. Right? Everyone should have a long life. How could it be that, again, our dysfunctional Father who art in heaven, how could it be the Almighty determined this person only gets 19 years on this planet? So I want to throw two pieces into this. Again, we're getting a little bit metaphysical, a little Kabbalistic here, but hey, what the heck? We'll have a good beer with us. So, I want to throw two ideas. What is who are we? In other words, who's Chelsea, right? Who's Jan? Who are we? Well, that's true, but meaning, am I this like 6'4" bozo sitting on a bar stool? Is that Pinchas Landis?
Part of, right?
So it's part, but it's not the real me. The me is the soul inside of Pinchas Landis, right? The soul inside of the body is Pinchas Landis, right? The body is just what I use to get around and do what I need to do. But the real me is the soul inside of me. And our tradition teaches us that a soul, that a neshama, is part of Elokai Mimal, it's part of the Almighty. In other words, every single one of us has a piece of God as us. So what's our body? Our body is our physical way of getting around. Now if you look in the Torah, a body, when Adam, the first man, was created, it says that God took from the dust of the earth and breathed it into the soul of life. So basically a human being is half God and half dirt. Right? Our body is dirt, our body's physicality is matter, and our soul, which is complete spirituality, is a piece of God. And every day we have to make that decision, are we God or are we dirt? Right? So, therefore, if we're the real us is a spiritual being, well, spiritual beings don't have time, don't have space, don't have, we're thrown down into this world of time and space and put into a physical body to constrain the soul, but the soul is non-physical. So therefore it really has no time and has no space and lives on eternally, right? So when somebody dies or is killed, God forbid, their time on the planet ended, but that soul's still alive. So where is it? Right? Where is it? So that's what we call, you call it heaven. You ever heard the term Shemayim? You ever heard the term Olam Haba? You ever heard the term Olam Aruchni? You ever heard the Olam Neshamos? These are all the terms for where the souls go. Right? There's a spiritual world where the souls, so to speak, live.
Do they become paranormal?
What do you mean by paranormal?
Spirits?
Well, they're non-physical. I mean, but yes.
We call it sparks.
So again, we're getting into deep Kabbalah here that like I'm just not qualified to really go deep into. But what it is, here's all I understand. Going back to what we asked before about what the ideal is. The ideal is a synergy of these two worlds. That's what we're told happens in the Messianic era. The physical and the spiritual come together into one world. How does it look? Haven't the foggiest, right? But that's what it is. But the souls, so to speak, have to hang out somewhere till the world's brought back to its fruition of physical and spiritual being united into one. And therefore, they essentially, I guess it's paranormal. I guess it's what's the term in science fiction? Alternative universe, is that the term? Alternative galaxy, alternative universe. I hate to use that term. That's almost what it is. That when a soul leaves this world, a soul's non-physical, so it doesn't go to heaven, right? It's non-physical, right? I mean, just getting really all over the place here. One of the famous questions that's asked is if God knows everything we're going to do. Hey, how you doing? Right? Cool, you gonna play for us? Yeah. If God knows everything that we're going to do, how can we ever be rewarded? How can we be punished? And how do we have free choice? Right? Famous Jewish philosophical question. Maimonides writes this question is so good, there's no way to answer it. But the beginning of the answer is that God is not physical. Right? What is the definition of physical? Matter. Right? Something that has matter is physical. Something that doesn't matter, right? Something that has no matter is non-physical. But if something doesn't have matter, what else doesn't it have? Any scientists in the room? Time or space, right? No matter, no time, no space. So God's not physical, so he has no matter. Therefore, he exists, so to speak, in a timeless, spaceless environment that sort of coincides with our time, space constrained environment, right? So if you are God and don't have time and space, what does an existence without time and space look like? Well, past, present, future, here and there is all the same, right? So of course he knows everything we're going to do because there's no time. Now, we are constrained by time and space. Therefore, we have free choice. We make our choice. Yeah, again, this is, like I said, hard question, deep philosophy. The bottom line is the real reality, if you will, and the real us is the soul. So therefore, going back to what we said before about Shiva, that really, if you think about it from a Jewish standpoint, we shouldn't mourn when someone passes away because they're in a better place. But that's really what we believe. They are in a better place. They're in a world that's completely spiritual. A completely spiritual world. And that don't have to deal with the trials and tribulations of a physical world. So therefore, who are we mourning for? Are we mourning for them? No, we're mourning for us. We're mourning for us because we don't have them anymore. But they're in a better place, right? So, but Rabbi, you haven't answered my question. When someone dies at 19, how do you explain that? So I'll throw in one more Kabbalistic idea. It's the idea of reincarnation. Reincarnation is a traditional Jewish belief, believe it or not. We created the idea of reincarnation, and it's very much a fundamental Jewish belief that we've been here before. This is how some explain déjà vu, by the way. By the way, Maimonides did not agree with him. Maimonides, one Jewish philosopher, said there was not reincarnation. But pretty much every other Jewish philosopher throughout history, every other classical Jewish philosopher at least believes in reincarnation. Kabbalistic literature, Kabbalah, believes in reincarnation. So that means that for most of us, it's not our first tour here, right? So why are we reincarnated then? Let's ask a different question, or a question to predicate that. Why does the soul come down to earth to begin with? Like, don't you think we're a lot better up? It's not, I'm saying up there. Don't you think we're a lot better there? It's not there. No, not physical, right? Are we a lot better in the spiritual world than the physical world? So why did God create us anyways? Right? So that every soul has to achieve the ultimate reward, the ultimate enjoyment, which is this ultimate spiritual bliss. But what's the best kind of reward? If you have, let's go back to Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Worth $150 million. How did he get that $150 million? Came from nothing, worked hard, helped build his family's business from a nothing. First of all, his father started as a clerk in a wine store. He ends up buying the wine store. He turned the wine store from a $5 million business to a $25 million business. He invests in Facebook. He becomes a blah, 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 blah. He's worth $150 million. What do you think Gary Vaynerchuk would appreciate more? $150 million that he worked for, or he buys the Powerball ticket and wins $150 million? Which one is more enjoyable? Which one's the ultimate enjoyment? Well, he works for it, of course. Right? So sages call it Nahamet to Kasufa. It's the bread of shame if you whatever your possessions are, you don't work for them. When you work for something, you appreciate it. So if God's goal is to give every soul the most ultimate enjoyment and the most ultimate pleasure, well, you got to do something for it, right? Because if we're just given it, it's not the ultimate pleasure. So that's this world. So for our souls, each have a purpose. And until that purpose is fulfilled, we can't get the ultimate pleasure. For some of us, maybe, well, not us here, but for some of our ancestors, maybe they did in their first 120 years. Maybe they need another year. Maybe they need another 19 years. Right? There's also, you can explain, I went to the 19-year-old kid from yesterday. What about, God forbid, a kid that dies at 6 months? A kid that dies at 1 month? A kid that lives for a day and dies? How do you understand that? So at least the way I understand it, based on what we're saying, is that means that soul had that little bit more that it needed in this world before it reaches perfection. You say, but what does a one-day-old kid do? What does a one-day-old sick kid's life look like? We have some medical people here, right? Right? What does a one-day-old say? A lot of people are giving to that kid. A lot of people are giving a lot of attention, energy, and focus trying to help that kid out. Maybe that kid needed to be a conduit for chesed, a conduit for kindness, and just needed to help other people do kindness and be a recipient of kindness, just a little bit to reach his perfection. And a lot of people don't realize that there's a whole concept of you don't accept kindness, you don't accept things. No. A lot of times when you accept, you let people do things for you, it's a tremendous thing. You build a connection, you build a relationship, tremendous thing. Maybe that's what that soul needed, one more day. Right? And that's sort of the, I know we've gotten deep here tonight, but let's have another beer, we'll really run with it. But that's at least the concept of what we believe. So death, look, death is always tragic, but for us. Now I'm going to take it to a different level, tying this all together. That according to Jewish tradition, somebody dying at the age of 103 in a nursing home is just as tragic as a kid dying at 1 day old or 6 months old or 19 years old. Now, Rabbi, now you've really lost it. You've had one too many beers. Like, what are you talking about? I'm going to say it again because I want to drive it home. Somebody dying at 103 in a nursing home is just as tragic as somebody dying at the age of 19. How in the world can I say such a thing? What am I talking about? The answer is this. The answer is that describing this world we're talking about, or the world the way it's supposed to be, that's what the world's supposed to look like. And in that world, do people die? No. It's the synthesis of spiritual and physical, and part of that synthesis is no more death anymore. Another thing the prophet Isaiah says, and this is traditionally, a lot of times been a funeral, you might have heard it said at the end of eulogy, he says the phrase that that there'll become a time when death will end forever and the tears will be wiped away from all faces. What does that mean? It means, again, in this messianic era we're talking about, people won't die anymore. We'll live forever. And there was a time period in history where we could have circumvented this whole 4,000 year, no, 5,779 years that we've had of a crazy world, and that is really, had Adam and Eve done things a little different, this is the Garden of Eden. I'm describing the Garden of Eden. And by the way, you'll hear sometimes the world to come described as the Garden of Eden. That's why, because the Garden of Eden was the synthesis of physical and spiritual. And they had one commandment, right? One thing to get the reward, so to speak. Again, this is how it's told to us, but how we understand it is they had that one, don't eat from the fruit. Don't eat from the tree. As long as you don't eat from the tree, you're all good. But if you eat from the tree, what's going to happen? You're going to die. Now, how did the snake trip up Chava? How did he trip up Eve? He said, I'll prove to you you're not going to die. Go ahead and eat from it. And she didn't die. He said, oh, wow. It wasn't that you'll die. It's again, it's poison, you die. No, it's because if you eat from it, I'm going to have to make the world in a certain way. The death is going to be necessary until we bring the world to perfection, and we're going to have to go through this whole thing, and yada, 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 and that's the result. But the idea is we're not supposed to die. So think about it. Just everyone take a minute or a second or 10 seconds and think. Everyone's lost a loved one, I'm sure. We're all old enough to have lost a loved one, right? I've lost many, but we've all lost loved ones. Imagine a world where that didn't happen. Just forget about the tragedies, the global tragedies, the macro tragedies, the micro tragedies. Let's think about those for a minute. Just losing a grandparent that you're close with, a parent, God forbid, a sibling, whatever it is. Think about that. And think about a world where that doesn't exist anymore. That's what we're mourning on Tisha B'av, not having that world. And therefore, that's what I meant when I said it's really just as tragic when someone dies at 103 than when someone dies at 3. Same tragedy, because neither's supposed to happen. Neither's supposed to happen. Now again, I know it's not exactly true, because bottom line is, I know the reality, I get it, but I'm talking from a very metaphysical, philosophical point that both should be equally tragic, because really people aren't supposed to die. Okay, I'm like blowing people away here. Right? I'm really throwing a lot at you. Any other questions? Anything light? Or yeah, Jeremy?
So what happens, I know this year is a bit different because Tisha B'av is the day after, but what happens if someone has to drive for a long distance or work? What do you do? Right.
Well, so Jeremy asked, Yirmiyahu asked that what's different this year of Tisha B'av because it's pushed off because it doesn't fall on Shabbos. So first of all, Tisha B'av is not like Shabbos or the holidays that you are even on a regular year. You're allowed to drive or use electricity or do all that on Tisha B'av. But that being said, you're supposed to, best case scenario, really stay focused on the day. So it's on a Sunday, so it's pretty easy. But ideally, you shouldn't go to work. You should try and focus on the day. There's a whole slew of Tisha B'av videos available on Torah Anytime, on H.com, any website that teaches Torah, but this year, because it's this pushed off version of Tisha B'av, it is a little bit lighter. Like that, if somebody has to go to work, it's treated a little bit lighter. It is a little different in that way, shape, or form. And like if somebody has trouble fasting on a regular Tisha B'av, they have to push a little bit harder, but on this year, because it's pushed off, once you have trouble and you're not feeling well, you can break the fast. So there are those differences because it's pushed off. So there are some, those halachic differences that come up. So, okay, this has been fun tonight. Any other questions? But I didn't get your name. What was Henry? Nice to meet you. Is that a bass or a cello? Bass. Cool. You play the electric bass too, or? Awesome. Welcome. It's good to have you here. And what was your? Devorah. Were you here? You were never here before, right? Awesome. Welcome, Devorah. Okay. So if people came in, just welcome. Okay. I officially usually start running my mouth around 8 o'clock. I'm more than happy to keep going as long as you want. If there's any more questions or thoughts, concerns, issues, anyone want to throw stones at me? Yeah.
No stones. Going back to World War I,
yeah.
I was not aware that it was destroying the Jewish community. I never knew that.
Yeah, so if you look at the history of World War I, the Jewish communities of Europe were pretty much decimated at that point. The infrastructure, just take your pick on where you want to look. The Russian Pale of Settlement was very disrupted during that time period. For sure, Eastern Europe, the community was very disrupted at that point already. So it was very much very much looked at as the community did not recover after that point. Wasn't annihilated yet. By the way, that's why I specifically use the term decimate. Decimate is one of the most misused terms in the English language. Anyone know what the term decimate means? Devorah?
Destroy down to like 1/10.
No. Destroy 1/10. Only destroying 1/10. But you had the right idea, right? you went for the phonetics of it. Because a Roman legion that was insubordinate, the way they were dealt with is they were decimated. The 1/10 of the legion was put to death. And that's where the term decimation comes from. That's how they dealt with the insubordinate legions. There's a great, if you ever read the book The Prime Ministers, anyone ever read it? Prime Ministers by I'm blanking on his name, but he was a diplomat in Israel for many years, and he wrote a lot about Begin. Is really the focus. I mean, it's about many of the prime ministers, but a lot about Begin. So when Begin met with Carter for the first time, Yehuda Avner is his name. So when Begin met with Carter for the first time, Begin's a fascinating individual in history, but he was so driven by Jewish history, much more so than any prime minister before or after him. Everything he did was he saw himself as representing every Jew for 3,000 years, and that's how he focused. And when he went to be with Carter in their first meeting, he said, Mr. President, in Eastern Europe in World War II, our people were tertiated. What did he mean? 1/3 of our people were wiped out, right? And Carter's like, tertiated? And he goes, yeah, tertiated, 1/3 of our people, right? So because Begin was born in Poland, grew up in Israel. He would listen to BBC every night so that, knowing that he'd have a life of politics, he wanted to have a masterful grasp of the English language so that when he would deal with Americans or British, he would be able to really talk well. And he had a tremendous master of the English language. Especially, our people were tertiated in World War II. So the word created by Menachem Begin. Yeah. So, okay, questions? Any other questions? Anything? Yeah? Yeah, Henry.
I heard that life is supposed to be better because we're in the physical world, not worse. Like you were saying that it's worse that people took the fruit or whatever.
Yeah. So Henry, tell me if I'm going to repeat it for everyone and tell me if I got it right. Henry's asking that, once again, isn't one of the there's many differences between us and other major world religions, but one of the big differences is the fact that we're focused on this world. We're not focused on the next world. We are very here and now. Right? Is that essentially what you're asking?
Yeah.
That's 100% true. If you go through the whole 5 books of Moses, there's no mention of the next world, no mention of the spiritual world. That's why I kept saying the sources are Kabbalistic literature. This is really only, it's addressed a little bit in the prophets, for sure it's talked about in the Talmud, and definitely Kabbalistic literature is where it's heavily talked about. So Henry asked, but we're supposed to focus on the here and now? Yes, we're supposed to focus on the here and now. We believe that we have a wonderful, tremendous, beautiful life here. So therefore, we're not supposed to say, why are you a good person? Oh, so I'll have a place to go in the world to come, right? Like other religions say. I mean, we all know most other, I think most other major world religions, they're very then focused, right? They're very, it's like sue me when you get there and don't get it, right? They're very focused. No, we say we have a great life in this world. That's why we observe the Torah, so to speak, because it gives us a great life in this world, connecting to the Almighty in this world. That's what's for. It's not for the next world. We're very much focused on this world. We're not told that we're going to get, have 72 people waiting for us in the world to come. That's not our religion. Now, that being said, when you do get into Kabbalistic literature, it does describe a beautiful spiritual world, not 72 special people, but a beautiful world. By the way, that reminds me of a story of there was a certain. God forbid, a fundamental terrorist of the Muslim faith who performed a certain terrorist act and suicide act and went up to heaven to get his reward. And they said to him, he said, okay, I'm here, I want my reward. And he said, okay, great. Well, here's Benjamin Franklin, here's Jefferson Davis, he said, well, who are these guys? And they said, well, you wanted your reward. He said, yeah, my reward's supposed to be 72 virgins. He said, oh no, you heard us wrong. It's 72 Virginians. So anyways, sorry, bad joke. I got to edit that one out, right? Can't leave that on the film. Anyhow, sorry. Bad joke for Rabbi Landis. I'm sorry.
Great joke.
Yeah. Anyhow, on that note, yeah. So, but basically, Henry, yeah, we are the source we were saying is a Mishnah Pirkei Avos. Right? The Mishnah Pirkei Avos says that we are supposed to serve our master as if there was no reward. What does that mean? Like there's no reward? No, not as no reward, but our service in this world should be so enjoyable and so pleasurable to us that we don't need any other reward. Just the relationship is so tremendous that we don't need anything else. And that's why they tell a famous story about the Vilna heretic. Right? Vilna is a famous city in Lithuania. It was a big Jew. It was the capital of the Jewish world in pre-war Europe. And there was a guy they called the Vilna heretic. And meaning he denied God, he denied the Torah, he denied everything. But you know what? He still kept Shabbos, and he still kept Sukkot and Pesach, and still ate cholent and everything. And they said to him, like, you said you're a heretic. You don't believe in God, you don't believe in the Torah, but why are you still like keeping Shabbos and eating cholent? And I said, hey, it's a great life. What do you want from me? Right? So, and that's the bottom line. We do what we do because it's great. But when we get into Kabbalistic thought, which is where we've been treading tonight, that's how we that's how we juxtapose the two at some level.
Isn't there a Yiddish expression, suffering is for fools?
Probably. Sounds good. Yeah, I like it. Suffering is for fools. Well, I gave a talk. Several months ago. A few you I think were there. I called it "The Nick is the Way." Who was at that talk? I was at a shmorg a few months ago. But I called it "The Nick is the Way," and it was based on that there's a there's a book by someone named Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way. Anyone ever heard of the book? Heard of Ryan Holiday? So it's one of these New York Times bestseller books. It's a great book, but it talks about the idea of stoicism. So stoicism, I think, is another word that people don't really understand what it means. People think stoic means, oh, I'm very placid, I'm very, I'm stoic, right? That's what people think stoicism means. It's not what stoicism means. Stoicism is attributed by Marcus Aurelius, attributed to Marcus Aurelius, one of the Roman emperors, and it was a philosophy of embracing obstacles and becoming better through obstacles. In other words, the whole idea of being stoic and unemotional and unchanged was that when bad things happen, you don't let it shake you up. You keep moving forward and you embrace the obstacle and you move forward. That's what stoicism really is. So Holliday's book on this called The Obstacle is the Way. I mean, because that comes from Marcus Aurelius' words that he wrote, where he said that the obstacle is the way to success. When you have an obstacle, you don't avoid it, you embrace it, and you move forward. So I call it the nick is the way, because like if you get nicked by something, you're nicked by a knife, you're nicked by something. Also, the Hebrew word for obstacle is nikshol. So it's like a play on words of the Hebrew. And I call it the Jewish roots of Stoicism, because Marcus Aurelius was the Roman emperor circa 170 of the Common Era. And the Talmud tells us a story that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the redactor of the Mishnah, had a relationship with a Roman emperor by the name of Cantinas, and that they would study together back and forth. They had a tremendous relationship. And according to most historians, Marcus Aurelius was Cantinas. Right? It's the same guy. And therefore, what I posited in this class to start with was that where did Marcus Aurelius get the idea of Stoicism from? He got it from Judah the Prince, from Yehuda Nasi, from his friend the rabbi. Because it's a deeply Jewish idea that, who's ever heard of Rabbi Akiva? One of the famous Jewish rabbis, one of the famous rabbis of the Talmud. This was his philosophy, Stoicism. He's famous for saying a phrase, Kol David Rechman L'Tavavid, that everything that the Almighty does is for the best. What does that mean? It's for this? Meaning, if it happens, I'm supposed to grow from it and be better. Right? And he got it from his Rebbe, who was someone by the name of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Anyone ever heard the term in Hebrew, Gamzu Latova? The phrase Gamzu Latova? Gamzu Latova means this will also be good. And there's a rabbi who coined that phrase, they even called him Nachum Ish Gamzu, meaning Nachum, the man who says Gamzu. Because the idea is that he's saying that everything will be for good. If I have an obstacle, if I have a challenge, it's to be better, it's to grow from. And I believe that Marcus Aurelius learned that from us, and therefore this whole idea of an obstacle being the way, it's very, very much a Jewish idea. And it comes from our sources. What was the question led to that? Did I answer the question? I don't even remember. That's the problem. When you're a rabbi and you ask a question, you don't know the answer. You just have to change the subject and no one knows. Suffering is for fools. Right, exactly. So we believe that suffering is there for us to grow. That if there's a challenge, it's there. A challenge is there for us to be better. Kol da'avid Rachman l'tav avid. Everything the Almighty does is for the best. And Rabbi Akiva himself, the one who coined the phrase, how did he die? Anyone know the story? Who has ever been to Caesarea, to Caesarea in Israel? Right? What's it famous for? You have the whole Greek city there. You have the big amphitheater, and you have the hippodrome, and you have this beautiful harbor built by Herod. You know what happened? The hippodromes where they would have the chariot races, that big open area there. You know what happened at hippodrome besides chariot races? That's where Rabbi Akiva was killed by the Romans. Right? It was at a time period where the Romans forbade the public teaching of Torah, and Rabbi Akiva continued to teach Torah. Therefore, he was captured by the Romans and put to death. And as they are assassinating him, putting him to death, murdering him, whatever you want to say, it was sunrise, and he started saying the morning Shema. And he started saying the Shema. Right? The Shema is the ultimate statement of belief in the Almighty. Here he was killed in a morbid way. I won't describe it here because some people might still be eating. Morbid way. And he started saying the Shema. And as soon as saying to him, like, Rebbe, Ad Khan, like that far? Like your belief and this belief of embracing the obstacle goes that far? And he said, look, all my life, I've always been troubled by the first line of the Shema. Not Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, but the V'ahavta, the first paragraph. What's the first line? V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol vavcha b'chol nafshecha b'chol ma'odecha, which translates as that you have to love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your possessions. Right? That's how we translate that. So he says, I was pretty sure I always loved God with all my heart. I was pretty sure I always loved Him with all my possessions. Now I can try to love Him with all my soul. I'm not going to embrace this opportunity. Again, I don't know if any of us would be anywhere near that level, but that's where Rabbi Akiva was. And that is the Jewish way, that when we have challenges, we embrace them and we grow from them. We become like Oprah, who's not Jewish. We become like Tony Robbins, who's not Jewish. But there's many Jews like Menachem Begin, perfect example. Perfect example. Right? Menachem Begin was born in Poland, was in what's the place called in Russia where they send people to? Not the Gulag, the other one. Siberia, right? He was in Siberia for a period of time, eventually escapes and goes to Israel. He's pursued constantly by the British when he's in Israel because he was the head of the Irgun, and he was leading the whole Irgun fight. He lived for a period of time in this like tiny closet to hide from the British, like for months on end. Very difficult life. Finally, the state's established, goes through the War of Independence, and is successful in the War of Independence, but then he's on the political outs literally for 30 years. He's the head of the opposition for 30 years with like almost like he thinks no chance of getting anywhere. And then finally, something happens. What happens? Again, we can go politically and say that there's this influx of Sephardim, of the Sephardic Jews to Israel. Sephardic Jews were never really treated right by Mapai, by the Eastern European Labor Party that wasn't in charge. Begin and the Likud Party really reach out to them. And in a totally shocking election, after Begin had a stroke, a lot of people don't realize that. He had a stroke 6 months before the election. He was incapacitated in a hospital 6 months before the election in 1976? I think in 1976 when he was elected. 1975? Whatever it was, the year he was elected. Yet he becomes one of the most beloved prime ministers Israel ever had. And he's the one who brought peace with Egypt. Right? Yeah.
Well, he also did tremendous things for the United States and the world by bombing nuclear reactors, Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, right. Helped everyone out with that one, right?
At the time, even Reagan said it was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, but even you look at him, like when he said, going back to that fateful meeting with him and Carter, everyone, on both sides, everyone was nervous because they were so different. Yet he became best friends with Carter. He became best friends with Sadat. He had a hard time with Reagan. Right? Actually, it was interesting that when he was on a trip to America, and really the goal, it was after the Dimona reactor, and things were kind of tight. Oh, it was after the first Lebanon war. So things were kind of tensious between America and Israel at that time, and between Reagan and Begin. Reagan, Palestine. It's a song, right? Yeah, we didn't start the fire. But that's what's on Reagan, Palestine, because Reagan and Begin had a big struggle because of the first Lebanon war, and Begin goes on a trip to America to reconcile with Reagan. At the time, his wife was sick. He didn't want to go on the trip because he was, again, talking about a beautiful husband-wife relationship. Him and his wife were one of these like beautiful, beautiful relationships, and he didn't want to leave her side because she wasn't well. She said, "Don't worry, the doctor says I'm going to be fine. You don't have to worry. Go to America, talk to Reagan, get things reconciled. You'll be fine." When he's in America, his wife passes away. Before he ever gets to Reagan, of course, he flies back to Israel, never has to meet with Reagan. At that point, that's basically the end of his career. I think he had 6 more months before he eventually told his chief of staff, "I can't do it anymore," because he was so depressed after his wife passed away and the aftermath of the first Lebanon war that he became like a recluse for the last 7 years of his life and removed himself from political life. Anyways, sorry, that's a real tangent over there. But Begin is a perfect example, and Rabbi Akiva Begin, countless examples of our Jewish leaders who have just said, you know what, Sharansky. Anyone know the story of Natan Sharansky? Right, Sharansky, well, he was in the Gulag, right? Or was it Siberia? I forget which one he was in. But also, terrible life. But persevered and grew from it, became and used it to inspire him and to be better. And I think that's what we have to do both on a micro level and that's on a macro level, and that is the lesson of Tisha B'av. Not to say that the great tormentors of Jewish history are off the hook, God forbid. Right? The Talmud talks about them and they're just desserts, right? Definitely, but I think we have to learn the lessons and say somehow this is for us to be better, and somehow this is for us to grow. Just in case people start going, I did put some advertisements on the table that next week we have the Shmorg on Tuesday night. Grab it and join us at the Shmorg. Also, we have a nice Shabbaton coming up August 23rd through 25th. We'd love to have you at. But again, I'll hang out as long as you guys do. So I can take some more questions or we can call it a night. Really up to you. Anyone else? Questions, comments, concerns? Henry got a good beer? Good. Okay, but I didn't catch your name either. I'm sorry.
Ian.
What's that? Ian, nice to meet you. Nice to have you here. So. Okay, well thank you everyone. I believe our next Torah on Tap is September, whatever the second Thursday of September is. Try to remember a time in September, and we'll be back here for that. In the meantime, we'll hope to see you at the Shmorg or anything else that we do on a regular Tuesday night at Partners in Torah. And have a great week, and have a debate with a rabbinical friend of mine that when a fast day comes up, what's the proper greeting? So I always say have a meaningful fast. He hates that. He says you should have an easy fast. It's a debate we have. Okay, I believe you should have a meaningful fast. It should be easy too, but meaningful. Okay, everyone have a good one. Thank you so much for coming.